Long before the motor car and the omnibus found their way along the leafy byways of the Gwyn Valley, south of Bristol, there was a light railway, almost a toy. It ran between Weston, Clevedon and Portishead, and its assets, steam, scenery and sea, should have saved it from extinction. Building the railway which linked the three coastal towns was a financial risk. They were already served by branches of Brunel's broad-gauge Great Western Railway. Undaunted, the company went ahead, and after many years' delay, the dream was realised. Clevedon to Weston in 1897, and 10 years later, the much-awaited extension to Portishead. As the seaside holiday became popular, more and more railways like the Weston, Clevedon and Portishead cut through the countryside to the coast. Peaceful watering places grew into resorts. Doctors began prescribing a few breaths of ozone and a dose of sand, sea and sunshine as a cure for all ills. The railway journey was an adventure in itself, but so many of those little railways have gone. At Clevedon, only the headquarters of the line remained to hold its memories for 78-year-old David Lewis.
The thrill that I got out of it, it was something that was unique, something unusual in this Clevedon. There you had this engine, this train, running across and into a town. And it thrilled me because I was younger then.
The atmosphere of the line was a magnet for photographers, some of them well known. But moving pictures are extremely rare. These images, filmed almost 60 years ago, capture just a few seconds of the line's 43-year lifespan.
You could feel them warm in the train, and the steam would be going through the pistons, and then there'd be a sudden gush. It was it. Somebody was snorting, and she'd roll and rear, and you'd think, well, here we go, and she'd only move a couple of yards, but she'd create hell of a noise to do it.
Look no further for the reasons such a line closed. The M5 speeds commuters, holidaymakers and goods vehicles to their destinations for just £5.5 million a mile. Light railway shareholders considered £3,000 per mile for their road a bargain. Now the trackbed is silent, reclaimed as a wildlife sanctuary. Plans to reopen a section as a narrow-gauge line and cycle path have never materialised, but an O-gauge model does exist. Everyone benefited from the healthy rivalry that existed between the WC&P and the Great Western.
To see the GWR engine coming in, it was excitement really, and everybody seemed so happy in them days, jolly to do things for nothing, if you understand, give everybody a hand. If you had a case, there'd be people jumping on it. But today, of course, they're different. They'd leave you carry it themselves.
Passengers arriving at Clevedon via the GWR were surprised to see a set of rails and gates outside the station. They were even more intrigued to witness a man walking across the busy road junction carrying a pair of flags, followed by a passenger train, just one of the several rules laid down by a local bylaw. Trains must not whistle on approaching or departing near the church. Trains to cross the road at walking pace, 4 miles per hour. Trains not to cross the Ken Road within 10 minutes of Great Western trains arriving or departing. But what people remember best is the man that held the flags.
I love to think when my mind takes me back to that, of jumping on it and nobody saying, okay, and you paid the fare as you went along, and you'd hear this engine with the thrill, the steam as you went along, going through the village in itself, coming out of East Clevedon into the Gwyn Valley. and it opens out in a vista like a kind of a Texas prairie. And I could imagine the Indians were then attacking the train, and here was the picture, if it could be taken. You was waiting for the John Wayne, if you understand, on this railway. But you came down to earth to hear the Somerset drawl of the engine stopping for cows. And what's wrong now? What's wrong with thee? These can't do that. And okay, you'd get out and he'd ask for help to push the cows off the line even. And you'd 10 minutes, but nobody seemed to be in a hurry. And away you'd shunt until you eventually got to Portishead, crossing that town and into the station.
Access to the Portishead terminus was through the archway of the White Lion Inn. This was the nearest the light railway could offer to a refreshment buffet. Although Portishead never attained the popularity of Weston and Clevedon as a holiday town, it did have a port. This provided the line with a useful source of income. Gradually, a further 16 stations were added to the line. But mention a railway station, and one might imagine a grandiose Victorian structure with every amenity to pamper the traveller. No such luxuries for passengers on the WC&P. Their station buildings were little more than garden sheds, yet the village folk who used them never grumbled. They knew everyone, and everyone knew them, as Betty Knight and Doreen Goulden remember.
When we were children, you know, quite young, and we lived down the lane, and we used to run up the road when the train was coming to wave to the people that were in the train, and they all waved back. And
and we used to say, who was on it today? Who's been to Clevedon, or who's been going to Weston?
Well, there was one part where they would go towards Weston and Gordano, and they would try to get up steam if they had a very heavy load on, and they couldn't get up enough steam, so they would have to shunt back and get up steam, and they would do that 2 or 3 times before they could get up over the little incline to sort of go on to Portishead.
And then we used to set off, and we'd come to a nice mushroom field if it was June or September, and we'd stop again, and the driver of the engine would blow the whistle and say, 10 minutes, next blow, you get on again. And we'd all get off, and we'd pick mushrooms or sometimes apples, anything, and get on board again. It was just heaps of time. Nobody hurried, nobody worried. I don't think they ran to a timetable. Perhaps they were supposed to, but they didn't. They just went when it was convenient.
Waywardness was part of the charm, yet the local line claimed it was the quickest, shortest and prettiest route to Weston, fast growing as a seaside paradise. Weston's wide expanse of golden sand lay only 8 railway miles from Clevedon, but the Ashcombe Road terminus was 3/4 of a mile from the promenade. To save passengers this tiresome walk, the company ran its own horse bus, which made regular round trips to the seafront. For holidaymakers, the line was a novelty. In fact, it almost became something of a joke. For a time, the company banned all photographers. Comic postcards pulled its leg unmercifully, and a reverend gentleman even saluted it in verse.
There is a line in Somerset, and to think it makes I sweat. The cheeriest, quaintest thing I ween that ever was by mortal seen. Or if to Clevedon er would go, er never starts at all, you know. Or if er do, er don't go far. But keeps us wondering where we are.
The initials of the Weston, Clevedon and Portishead didn't help, Phyllis Pittman.
One particular day when I was walking along the front, some people that had got off of the steamer, that used to call it the Clevedon Pier, some Welsh people, and asked me where they could get on the WC&P. And I said, well, if it's the lavatories you want, they're over there. And he said, no, it isn't the lavatories we want, it's a train.
At most, the railway employed 35 people. It wasn't a joke to them. They took their work very seriously, none more so than the youthful Vic Ware.
Some people probably thought it was a bit of a toy railway, but it wasn't a toy railway at all. It was a serious railway, and it was a serious job we were doing. the railway was run on the same lines as the main line.
Closure terminated Vic's promising railway career, so he went to work on the family smallholding. But when he'd gone for his junior clerk's post on the light railway, he'd been faced with an aptitude test.
A man came down from Tunbridge, Mr. Hewitt, to interview me, and I had to do a bit of typing for him, and he gave me a sum to do. I had to divide one set of figures by another to 2 decimal places, which was quite easy for me, and that's how I got the job. I started at 17 and sixpence per week. That went on for some little while. I think then, after a struggle, I got another half a crown, I remember that. When I go shopping in the Triangle now, I often wish we could bring the steam trains back again. It's all gone now. We didn't realise it at the time, but we were really playing trains with the real thing.
Here the locomotives were kept and serviced by the line's only fitter. He must have been dedicated. It was a labour of love. The engines had had several previous owners and were well past their best.
I used to ground T-fit drill quite a lot when I had any spare time, because I was always interested in the engines, and he used to explain to me all about the engines and how they worked. And he was always patching them up somehow or other to keep them going. They were terrible old engines. They were only somebody else's second-hand engines, cast-offs.
As a cost-cutting exercise, the company investigated alternatives to steam power and purchased 2 petrol-driven rail cars. Even these needed expert nursing.
We were waiting for a new radiator to come for a long time, and the radiator was leaking so bad, and George said if there's nobody much on the train one afternoon, you know, when there's nobody much on, we'd stop at Ham Lane, he'd go in the field, pick up a lump of cow manure, put it in a bucket and get some water out of the ditch and put it in the radiator. And we did this, and it cured it for a time.
It was an extraordinary collection of about 20 locomotives. Each one had a name, some hired, like this one, some old-fashioned even before they arrived, like the very first Weston. These ridiculous-looking modified Muirhill tractors were used for shunting. Only the very popular open-ended coaches were acquired new when a South American railroad cancelled its order with the Lancaster Carriage Works. But it was the Hesperus that made the national newspapers when it failed to negotiate a wooden bridge at the jetty branch. Naturally, it became known as the Wreck.
They never named number 4. It came. We were excited when it came. I spent all day looking at it. It was a beautiful engine, even if it was second-hand. It was the best we had then.
The engine dates from 73, a regular rattle-trapper be. 3 times a day her tries to start, while spasms rend her gallant art. If time to Weston to arrive at 3:30, her comes at 5.
Little evidence remains that Clevedon once boasted 2 railway stations. It was hoped that something from the old stations would be retained within the new shopping complex. The only reminder of an age gone by is a road name and this section of track, given by British Rail. Once the Railway Arms, now named the Clock Tower. Station Road remains, but without the 840 to Portishead. Shunting goods wagons have given way to the car boot and the supermarket trolley.
Her whistles and her groans and grunts, and every 40 yards her shunts, 'tis wearisome upon my soul, the everlasting trucks o' coal. Her back's down 'pon 'em wi' a bump, and gips our nerves upon the jump. All through the summer day we ride, with lovely fields 'pon either side. The cocks and hens and vows and pigs be quite accustomed to our rig, and care not if we come or go, or bust, that Weston Gorday know.
In the first full year of operation, the line carried about 250,000 passengers and showed a healthy profit. But it was the cost of extending to Portishead that crippled the company and led to its going into receivership in 1909, where it remained until it closed. The receiver invited the young railway engineer Holman Fred Stevens to take the line under his wing. He had interests in 15 other lines, and his brief was to bring the WC&P up to their standards. The Kent and East Sussex Light Railway, known as the Farmers' Line, was the first he managed. It's still operated today by an enthusiastic preservation society. With its Brighton Terrier locomotive of the same class as Vic Ware's beloved number 4. The WC&P would have looked remarkably similar. Light railways were worked at slower speeds, constructed of lighter rails and operated to less stringent standards than main lines. They provided a lifeline to the isolated communities they served, thanks largely to a band of dedicated managers and staff who were often overworked and underpaid. Dan Carey was a guard on the WC&P at 17, in the days before demarcation. His son, Howard Carey.
Being a guard on the light railway wasn't no easy job. You had to be prepared to do anything. He issued tickets, he took money, he had to couple on and uncouple vehicles, engines, wagons, and open the gates, shut the gates. He had to even be prepared to help coal the engine up. 1937 was my first trip on the footplate, and we crossed the triangle. I was allowed to blow the whistle, open the gates, and it was just enough time for a guard to run into the Constantine Club and have a quick pint and back out and catch the train before it crossed the road, like as quick as that it was. When Colonel Stevens visited the line, he used to stay at the Grand Atlantic Hotel at Weston-super-Mare, and the guard was given the tip that Colonel was staying at Weston, so he waited at the gate. The taxi arrived, the Colonel gets out, gives the guard some money. That was to go across to the shop on the corner of Ashcombe Road, buy 2 packets of players, 20 players, plus the Daily Mail. Take it back, hand it to the Colonel, and the Colonel would hand back 1 packet of cigarettes. And he'd say to the men, or he'd say to the father, or Jack Reddick, whichever one it was, he said, now, you smoke my health, but don't let me catch you smoking on duty or else you give you the sack.
Colonel Stevens was always full of bright ideas and came up with new schemes to improve the finances of the line. One of these was in 1918, when he built the Yeohaven branch, a concrete jetty alongside the River Yeo. He also owned 2 motor vessels which shipped goods from South Wales. Each year, a little more of the line disappears. If you know where to look, the railway comes to life again.
When Delia once to Weston came, the railway played a party game. Waited at the Clevedon end and chatted wi' a porter friend for 1 full hour beyond the time. Oh, 'twas really like a pantomime. For in the wet, waited for the enginette. But 'twant no good. The thing broke down and left her there in Weston town.
The trains played havoc with Bill and Joyce Jones's courting. As if in revenge, their home is built across its old track bed.
I used to arrange to meet my fiancé, and I used to say, I'm going to catch the 6:30, you know, I'll meet you in the triangle, and we're going to go to the pictures.
6:30 come, no sign of a train, and I'd be there till nearly 8:30 before it come. So you was wife down waiting in...
I was waiting the other end.
In that down there. And I was waiting on the triangle. Well, by that time, it was too late to go to the pictures.
You were still waiting, though. And I can remember quite well waiting in the little waiting hut there, you know, and looking out and saying, oh, it's coming, you know. You could see it way down in the distance because the line was reasonably straight. And you sort of go back in the hut, wait a bit longer, and then you look out again, and it'd still be in the same place. It had broken down, you know. You could see it, but it could... For all that, it was happy days.
Holidaymakers arriving at Clevedon's pier via Campbell's paddle steamers were offered a 6-penny discount on the WC&P if they booked a return ticket to Weston-super-Mare. But the notice on the gate states that it was 6pence extra just to take the family pet with them on the pier, and there'd be another charge on the train. 60 years have passed since light railways covered Britain.
These were the very big steam trains that went on the main lines. They were very powerful and they could go 100 miles an hour.
Steam trains and the WC&P form a local studies lesson at Clevedon's Yeomore Infant School.
The trains on the Weston, Clevedon and Portishead Light Railway could only go at 25 miles an hour.
3 generations have grown up since the line closed. Many of these children, born into the space age, have never even seen a steam train.
Can you remember some of the names? Colleen?
Portishead.
Adam?
Weston.
Emma?
Clevedon.
Good girl. So I wonder if anyone can be clever and remember another one. James?
Hesperus.
Well done. When they got to Clevedon, to the clock tower in the triangle, they could only go at 4 miles an hour because there'd been a bylaw. Sometimes they went a bit faster because the traffic got very cross at being kept waiting.
These Clevedon children, filmed at the turn of the century, were raised in an age of steam. Dorothy Stockham was one of the class.
If we had any outings at all, it was always down to Weston. And it used to be such fun going down there on the tram. And we had to go out in the playground and do a lot of marching and exercises out there. Of course, when we got into school, the first thing we always had was a prayer and a hymn. During that time, the tram used to run along by the side of my house. And of course, where my cottage was, I could only step out. And I was right on the tram. And I used to hear the whistle blowing and blowing. And sometimes they would slow up. And not always did they want to get out. So I used to look out and they used to say to me, come on, open the gate. And I used to run out and open it and shut it. There used to be double gates over there. And there used to be a little shed where they had 2 levers. And Mr. Riddick used to open the gates to cross over the bridge to the little sort of farm. You couldn't call it a station. When it used to go by my house, it went by so that the smoke used to come right into my back room window and we used to be smoked out. And we couldn't see across the room. But we didn't sort of mind it because we did enjoy being in the cottage.
It did indeed seem all the more shocking when a small-scale line inflicted fatalities on the local community. The main cause of these was the fact that the railway crossed a number of roads, most of them ungated. As road traffic increased, so did the number of accidents, some of which were really quite nasty.
A motorcyclist had gone under the train at Weston and the 2 blokes were killed. That was the worst thing that ever happened on the Irish thing. And on top of that, the man that came to help was a bus driver. One of them turned out to be his son that was killed.
The old traditional pace of life was speeding up. Passengers were declining. People had to be enticed back by special trips to see the sights, local carnivals, or at jam-making time.
For even when you've passed the wicket and paid good cash for cardboard ticket, there's no dependence upon the train, however the officials scheme and strain, and 'tain't no good to fume and fret. Us takes our time in Somerset.
Time and pace was so much slower in those days. And on this railway, we used to run across the field and it used to stop and we used to get on. And one particular Saturday when I was going down to Weston, the vicar of Clevedon and his wife was on there. And between Clevedon and Weston, just outside of Kingston Seymour, they got out and picked a basin full of blackberries.
You'd get the guard, you'd get the engine driver, stop to have a chat with the farmer and ask, how's he getting on then, Charlie? Has he given calf yet? No, and they proceed and no shout from the passengers. There was no irritation or get on, but they take it calmly and on we'd shoot.
For our Saturday days out, which Mother used to take us to Weston, and we would go down through Clevedon, we would get down to the crossroads where Sam Harris would come and open the gates for us. And of course, he was quite deaf, so they had to blow the whistle quite loud to make him understand that the train was fairly near. And he would come, or his son would come, one or the other, and they would open the gates, and then he'd close the gates, and we would shout out to him as we went on further down. And we'd go on the sands and we'd have a tea out, and then we would come back. Nothing was hurried, nobody was rushed to do anything.
And then we'd come to the valley halt, and of course nobody waiting there. But we had to wait because it was old Mrs. Watts always came down on a Wednesday to go to market. And she was always late, of course, with a great big basket of, I don't know, eggs and chickens and all sorts, complete with her umbrella. And we'd have a chat with her, and then off we'd go again. And we went over the old Yeo Bridge, and it swayed up and down as usual, and we wondered how long it would last, if it'd still sway when we came back again. And, well, it did give out eventually. I think it's gone now.
They used to put the cattle out here at the back of my house that is now, and they used to load them up into there to go to Portishead or Weston. And they very often left trains, part of a train and trucks here. And then they would load up from there on a morning, and everybody in the village would be looking to see what they were loading up and such like. And it was great fun. We miss it.
During the 30s, light railways were wilting, just too tired to continue the struggle against the growing onslaught of the motor car, which left them financially exhausted and forced to close. By a remarkable stroke, the WC&P weathered this storm, ironically kept afloat by transporting road-making stone from the local quarries. But the Second World War finished the WC&P for good.
What a letter come from Tunbridge from Mr. Austin himself. I've still got the letter. Here it is. In view of the closing of this railway for all classes of traffic, I very much regret to say that your services will not be required after Wednesday, the 15th of May, 1940. W.H. Austin, General Manager.
Saturday, the 18th of May, 1940, was the final day of operation. Crowds turned out, there was cheering, they put a large Union Jack across the track. It was more like a rebirth than a wake, although there was a wreath hanging on the engine. Mr. Egar, a freelance reporter, bought the last ticket, and he presented it to Howard Carey.
He was at the station, and he waited till the train was just to leave, and he turned around and he bought the ticket because he was determined to have the last ticket that was issued in the railway. So then the train left for Weston, and the ticket was never punched. So it was all intact, you see. I was very sad to see the line close down. I was hoping for a career on there myself, like you follow father's footsteps. And it was terrible to see it get into the state of disrepair that it finally wound up in when the track was all pulled up and that. It was like a melting wound.
We went down to Weston, the weather were fine. We travelled on the Clevedon and Portishead line. Light-ora, 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 lie-eh. Light-ora, 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 lie-eh. Of snails and tortoises we heard lots of talk, but if we'd been in a hurry, we got out to walk.
As time went on, you realise how much you did miss it. It'd be lovely if we saw it come back again.
And it was very sad. It was all part of a family affair, really.
The steam is up, the engine waits, so pass along and take your seats. And if for home you booked your fare, tomorrow, sometime, you'll be there.
Wonderful days. The Clevedon, Portishead and Western Railway, I say thank you.